So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the October 2021 Spokane Audubon presentation regarding the Winter Raptor Survey program. And our special guest this evening is the program's creator, Jeff Fleischer. And to give you a quick background on Jeff, he got started doing wildlife survey work during his 15 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And he later started his own raptor survey efforts in Lynn County, Oregon, which soon attracted substantial interest and support from the East Cascades Audubon Society in Bend, Oregon. And it kind of snowballed from there, it seems. So now in its 18th season, the survey has grown from 79 routes to covering more than 27,000 miles in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and a small portion of Northern California and Utah. So this ongoing citizen science project is made possible by nearly 375 primary volunteers tracking changes in raptor population density and distribution throughout the Northwest, with the data then being added to the worldwide bird of prey database amassed by the Peregrine Fund. Numerous Spokane Audubon members are involved with the Winter Raptor Survey, so it's with great pleasure that we bring to you this evening our guest speaker, Jeff Fleischer. Jeff.
Hello. I've talked to a few of them already, but welcome. I'm honored to be able to talk a little bit about the project tonight, give you a little bit of history, go into some of the administrative stuff like protocols and goals and things like that. I'll talk a little bit about how I build the routes and where I place them. And then most of the program will be involved with showing you slides of pictures of different birds that have been found. We've found 31 species of birds in this project so far. And then we'll open it up to questions at the end. Jot some questions down if you want. I'll be glad to answer them as after we finish up. Okay, so Lindell, I just hit the share screen button, right? Okay, here we go. Where is my screen? Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, it's a picture of a red-tailed hawk looking right at you. Okay, all right, so welcome to the program. This is a presentation, like I said, of telling you a little bit about the project and the birds that we found and how we go about managing the project and doing different things with it. We'll go right into the goals. Of course, the main thing is to count birds of prey on established survey routes, which I put together. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. One of the goals is to make sure that the survey method that's used is a simple one. And that's important because if you overload your volunteers with information to gather that's really not of imminent value to understanding populations, you can tend to lose people that way. And one of the things that I want to do is make sure that I don't lose volunteer commitment, because when you create routes and over time, if you keep people on the same routes, if any of you know anything about the value of survey work from year to year, that's a critical piece to be able to try and have, mainly because each person will do their surveys in their own way. And over time, that data is much more comparable if say you had a different person surveying the route every year using a different internal method searching for and counting birds. So it's important to keep the people involved. The density and distribution patterns of birds that we find, I'm going to show you a couple of map examples of that. And it's pretty eye-opening when you see it in a map form, because up until about 5 years ago, I didn't have the ability to do that. And a member of the East Cascades Audubon Society is a GIS expert, and he was able to start developing maps off of the data that I had, and it makes a big difference. Instead of looking at a chart full of numbers, you can see patterns on a map. It's really cool. So you'll see some of that. Yeah, and we try and have a contact every year or every month, and some of you guys that I saw on the pictures there, like Don and Curtis, know this. I like to acknowledge every survey that comes in every month. So I spend a lot of time on a computer, but it's important that we keep that cohesiveness, that togetherness that seems to want people to come back and continue doing the work, which is really the main goal of getting people involved. I'm a people person, so I like everybody to be happy working together, and as a group, we're doing some great stuff. We do have a very simple protocol. Surveys are done once a month during December through February. That's the primary survey season. You can also survey during November and March, but those also have migrational activity in them. And this is primarily a wintering population study. So it acts as pretty good bookends for the wintering period by having some data also in November and March. So it's encouraged if you want to do it, but it's not necessary. I leave the survey dates at the discretion of each person. Everybody has different things going on in their lives every month, and to arbitrarily set a date to do it might conflict with people's needs, own personal needs, and it also might fall on a day that's pounding snow or terrible weather conditions, which would be hiding birds anyway from view. So the idea is to get people to make their own choices in terms of when they want to do their routes, and that's worked out pretty well. As you'll see in a few minutes, I've got a slide that shows a picture of the 5 most prevalent species in the project, and they account for more than 90% of all the birds tallied. And so if you're comfortable with the IDing of those 5 species, and I'll show you in a minute, then anybody can do that is welcome in this project. And they also have to have the desire to learn more, because they will. It's pretty simple to have to drive these routes and not doing something like that and then continually doing it. You amass an amazing amount of knowledge just by doing the surveys. And it's nice to know that from a personal standpoint, as well as getting the information for the project. You need to have a pair of binoculars. Spotting scopes are optional, but encouraged if you own one. The surveys should be done in fairly decent weather if possible, because like I said, if you do them during inclement weather, these birds, the main thing for them to do is to survive the winter. And if they're caught stuck out and having to hunt and feed in a blistering snowstorm, they lose body calories very quick in that circumstance, and it makes it very hard for them to keep going. So they're going to hide. They're going to get out of the elements during bad times. And if you take a survey during that period of time, you're probably not going to see a lot of birds that are out there that you normally would see on a good day. The speeds are that you do the survey depends on traffic and that type of thing, but we want people to go at a speed that they can actually view the habitat, so that they're not missing anything. All birds that are seen, whether they're 100 feet away or a quarter mile away, are recorded. And there are a lot of instances on a lot of routes where you have route paths coming close enough where you could have double counting potential of birds. So whenever that circumstance presents itself, I leave it to the volunteer to be judicious in what they record, because if you start recording the same bird 2 or 3 times, you're gonna skew the data a little bit. But anyway, and of course, we've driven probably, what was the last count? 935,000 miles of transects in the 17 years that we've done this project, and we've had not one major accident. So safety is primary to everything that we do. Okay, a couple of years ago when I brought the project to Washington, your area was one of the key areas that I was focusing on. And so this is kind of what I do. When I think of a new area to put routes in, I'll go to my DeLorme Atlas and Gazetteer and make photocopies, paste them all together, make a big base map like you see here. And then I'll take that and I'll go onto Google Maps, where you can see aerial photographies of the habitat. And then it's just a matter of looking at road conditions, if there's any perching opportunities for birds like power lines, structures, trees, that type of thing. And a good gravel-based road is preferred, especially in some of these hard-hit winter areas. But this is what I do, and you can see on the map here the various routes that we have in play now around Spokane. There's been more added that you can't see here, but this was basically the first year activity that I put together. And it kind of shows you how the displacement of the routes are and the coverage that it actually covers. And once the route is put together and I find somebody to do it, then the first year becomes a combined effort between the two of us to determine the best possible route path to do. When I'm looking at it on aerial photos, I can make a judgment call as to whether a road's good or not, but I rely on local knowledge from the people that are actually doing the surveys to tell me if there's some good roads that I missed, or if there's some roads that are no good that I put in there that we can change. So the first year is a year of massaging the route path. And then after the first year is done, then we have to have a concrete route path that we can take into the future so that we can compare data. And so that's the process that we use to establish new routes. Each route, of course, is specific to its own self. I make a data collection form similar to what's on the screen here, and it lists on the left side, it lists the sequential driving of all the road segments in the route. And then across the columns are the different species that are probably going to be found. And then there's a couple columns on the right-hand side of family groupings. I try to keep these forms to one page, so it's not a problem to deal with in the field, because you're going to be recording birds on your own form. So if you see it, like for example, in the falcons column, if you see a prairie falcon, you mark it with the banding code PRFA. If you see a peregrine, it's PEFA. If you see great horned owl, it's great horned owls. And we do allow for gathering data on birds that are not identifiable, except that you know that they're a raptor. And we'll collect that information under a Buteos column, or a falcon column, or an owl's column, or an accipiter column. We do have one more catch-all. It's called raptors. and if you just can't figure out what it is, even to a family, then that's where that goes. But these really help in the sense of focusing one piece at a time through the route. And you can see, at least on this particular route, the difference in some of the areas. And we track this from year to year. And there was somebody that asked a question earlier about habitat and changes. This is a good method of being able to monitor that, to see what the response is for birds if you do have habitat change. Okay, so the next 7 or 8 slides are going to give you an indication of how the project developed. The first 2 years, I did those 4 routes myself that you see in black. And that's when I discovered the real value of the Willamette Valley for birds of prey. And it got me thinking, okay, there's probably some other areas like this in the state of Oregon. So I did the first 2 years, and I was posting my results to the Oregon listserv called OBAL, and generated a lot of interest from other people. So the third winter, I expanded it with these red routes. Locally, I had about 8 different routes that I put together, had some birding friends take some of those. And then on the other side of the mountains in the Bend area, the president of the ECAS, the chapter over there, got wind of what I was doing the first couple of years. And he said, well, hey, how about if you help me make some routes over here by Bend? And I said, sure. So we put these routes together, and he and a few of his fellow members did those for that third winter. And so after the third winter was over, I thought, this is working out too well, so I'm just going to take it statewide. So I started contacting a whole bunch of people and wound up getting that amount of 56 more routes added to what we had already done the year before. And that was the basis for the first year of the project. We had 79 routes on board throughout the whole state. And then over the next 6 or 7 years, I added some more. We got the total up to 148. So that was a key point, because at the end of that year, I thought, let's see what Oregon does in comparison with the other states in the Northwest, and maybe we can start expanding a little bit. So I took it into Idaho that year, adding 31 routes, plus a little bit up along the Columbia River, and then also down in the Klamath Basin in the California portion of the basin. And then over the next several years, we added that many, and wound up with 311 routes at the end of that season there. And so you can see that big empty void up where you live. And I thought, okay, let's move it on a little bit more. And so that was the first year of expansion into Washington. I was really pleased with the interest that was there to do these routes. And I was just really happy to get that going. And then last year, I moved it over onto the west side of the Cascades, plus added some more in the east side, and then added some down in Utah, way down there in the right-hand corner. That was kind of fun. And then this year, so far, I've added 29 new routes. A lot of them are up above Seattle, up in the Skagit Flats and Sandwich Flats areas, which are key wintering areas for raptors, similar to what I experienced down in the valley. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we find up there in a formal way, as far as numbers and varieties of species. Okay. All right, so the rest of this is going to be dealing with the birds that we see. The top line is the family of buteos, red-tailed hawks, rough-legged hawks, red-shouldered hawks, ferruginous hawks, Swainson's hawks, and one lone zone-tailed hawk, and I'll talk about that later. The next line is falcons and eagles. You got kestrels and merlins and peregrines and prairies and gyrfalcons, bald and golden eagles. Next line is the 3 accipiters, coopers and sharp chins and goshawks. And then we got kites and harriers and osprey. And then we finish up with 2 lines of 12 different species of owls. So this is what in the upper right-hand corner, you see a crested caracara. I'll talk about him later. So I mentioned earlier that there's 5 species that make up more than 90% of all the birds that are counted every winter. And these are them. The bald eagles, the kestrels, the red-tailed hawks, the harriers, and the rough-legged hawks. These are the 5 species of birds that we can count on good numbers to count every winter. And they kind of break up in pretty strict percentages, and it's amazing over the 17 years that the variance of those numbers is only maybe 1 or 2 points. It's unbelievable how it's so stationary in terms of percentage of the total number of birds that we see. And all but the eagles, you'll notice, have a little bit of a downturn as winter progresses. The eagles start piling in when, well, for example, on my areas, when the sheep come in for lambing, like I talked to some earlier, but also smelt runs on the Columbia and some of the rivers in Washington bring in a bunch of birds. Snake River also, there's several places in Idaho that have large concentrations of bald eagles. So those 5 species, if people that are interested in getting involved in the project wish to, if you can identify those comfortably, that's a really good start, and I welcome the participation. Okay, so the red-tailed hawk is the first one. He's the king. Almost 50% of all the birds are red tails. This shot gives you a really good view of the key elements of identifying red-tailed hawks. Of course, you see the red tail, which is its name, but you also see the black patagial feathering in the front portion of the wing, off the side of the heads there, and the brown head with the white chest and a belly band that goes across below. That and the back side of the wings are usually always distinctly black compared to the middle part of the wing. So all those things show up pretty well in the field. I mentioned a little bit earlier about maps. This is 5 years ago. I got an individual in the ECAS membership that was a GIS specialist I mentioned. He helped me visualize what we were gathering in Excel charts. Whoever wants to really look at an Excel chart, but this kind of thing, visual, is really can be really impressive. And the next slide will show you why. But what I've done here in this program is to give you a sense of all of the routes that have the particular species that we'll be talking about on each one. So all but 2 of the routes that you see are red. There's 2 black ones. And so it's pretty well scattered throughout. Red-tailed hawks are pretty well scattered throughout the whole project area. And that's to be expected. They're the most common bird of prey that you can find. But when we decided to do these mapping things, Kevin said, the guy that helped me do this, he says, "You ever thought about doing density and distribution maps?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And I said, "That's just a pipe dream that I have." He says, "Well, I can do that." So I set up my Excel charts in a manner that he could utilize in his GIS programming. And so now we have these maps that show the densities of populations that we count on these surveys for each route. And then also the locations of the distribution of some of the key areas that these birds use. And over the next 2 slides, this is in December 2019, right? Now, if you go to January, watch in the center of the area around Kennewick, watch what happens to some of those circles. They get smaller. So birds are on the move, or they're dying, or whatever. Some of the other key areas like the Round Bend and Klamath Basin, and even some of the spots up by Kennewick and Pendleton and down in by Boise and over by Idaho Falls, they still maintain some good numbers, but there is change. And you wouldn't know, I mean, you couldn't really visualize that from an Excel chart. You know, you see the number, but you don't see it visually as it shows for the whole area. So these are kind of cool maps, because anybody that wants to go see a red-tailed hawk, if they look at this map, if they go out on a field trip in February, they go to one of these areas and they're pretty well darn going to see them. And that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted to be able to get the general public to be able to hunt down some of these birds for their enjoyment and see the areas where they can go to definitely see them. Of course, the characteristic of the red tail is primary. The one on the right hand there, it shows the brown hooded head that's pretty easy to see in the field with a very distinctive line separating it from the whiter chest. And of course, the belly band down towards the bottom part of the body. That's all indicative of red-tailed hawks from the front. And if you look at the one on the left here also shows the patagial feathers, which are very striking and indicative of red-tailed hawks. But on the right-hand picture, you'll notice that down the back side of the middle of the back, there's kind of like a really loose white V formed. A lot of times you see these birds, their backside, and it can be difficult to determine what it is if you're at some distance and your lighting is not good. But if you see that, loosely formed V, you know it's going to be a red-tailed hawk. And this, oh, okay. And then the colors for red-tailed hawks are all over the board. You can see a red-tailed hawk and you think, what is that? They can be dark, like the ones on the left, or they can be light, like the ones on the right there. But if you can see the tail, if you can see a head break between around the throat there, between the head coloring and the chest coloring. And if on this one on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, the bird facing away from you, you can see that white feathering that kind of forms that lazy V there. You know it's going to be a red-tailed hawk. This gives you an idea of just some of the examples of what they eat. That center picture, he's got a weasel in his clutches. I saw that picture, I thought that's pretty cool. I've seen them with snakes. I've seen lots of them with rabbits, lots with voles and mice and that kind of thing. But to catch one with a weasel in his grips, that was pretty cool. And on this picture here, kind of gives you some examples of how they can perch out in open agricultural fields that have this kind of equipment. The one on the left, you can see the birds that are looking away from you. There's 5 of them. You can see that those V patterns. The one that's looking at you with the white chest and the belly band and the clearly marked head, they all are red tails, and the black ones, of course, are ravens. Have any of you ever seen red-tailed hawks interact with other birds of prey? It's amazing. They get into so many fights. I've seen countless examples of harriers, and mostly with kestrels. They get in the way, and there's always confrontations. But you can see the protective stance in that center picture. They always throw their feet up because that's their weapon. They don't fight with their beaks. They fight with their talons. And of course, it gets a little bit more tense when you've got a prairie falcon going after dive bombing a red-tailed hawk. They are so fast. Sometimes the red-tailed hawks can't maneuver quick enough, and they get whacked pretty good. Those are sharp talons that peregrine falcons have. They're killing machines. This one happened to be one that a guy outside of Bend caught. It was too near a peregrine's nest, and he answered for that. And it happened to me last year on one of my surveys where I was watching a pair of peregrines do a courtship flight. And they were coursing around a field. And all of a sudden, this red-tailed hawk comes loping into the field, flying along, and he got it. I mean, he got bombed. The male bird immediately broke away from the female, went way up in the air, and came crashing down on this relentlessly on this red-tailed hawk 8 or 9 times before the hawk finally got into the trees. But peregrines are nothing to fool with, believe me. And red-tailed hawks always seem to get it in the worst position. And another interesting thing about red tails is that we have at SeaTac and also at Portland International Airport, there's trapping programs that birds are collected to keep away from plane interaction. And the people that capture them will tag them with these patagial wing tags that you see. And then they'll use our data to find out where concentrations of birds are throughout the winter, and then they take them to those areas and release them in hopes that they will interact with birds and not come back to the airport. And by and large, it seems to work. There's a few that tend to go back, but most of the time they stick with where they're deposited. And so that's a cool use of our data. American kestrel is the #2 bird in the project. Roughly 22% of all birds found are kestrels, and they're pretty well widespread too. I didn't mention on the red-tailed hawk map like this, but what you're looking at is the numbers from 2 winters ago. We haven't got these maps updated yet. They're getting worked on, but they haven't been updated yet. So I put the data in blue on the left-hand side, just to give you an indication of the 60 extra routes that we added last year that are going to show up on the map this coming, well, when we get them done. But it gives you an idea of the continuance of a lot of birds that show up for kestrels everywhere. Males and females are definitely different looking, as I'm sure most of you know. Males obviously much more colorful, but here's some pictures of pairs actually together, so you can see the contrast between the plumage on both. They like to perch hunt quite a bit, and they're a very common bird that you see when you drive around the roads perched on power lines like this, looking for mice and voles in the ground. But they also hover hunt too. You can see them out in the middle of the fields, fluttering in a stationary way, looking down on the ground, and that way they can cover more territory. I mean, they can move that hovering position wherever they want to go. And it makes this for a successful hunt usually when they're up there. And maybe you've seen how kestrels hover hunting? Yeah, it's pretty common. And they have quite a diversified diet. These are just 5 pictures. There's one in the upper left hand. They are a falcon and they can fly down birds, but they'll also take dragonflies and snakes and voles as well. So they have a wide variety of diet. Northern harriers, they're another species that has color differences in their sexes. This is a male on the right, female on the left. They are pretty widespread too, although you're starting to see a few more black circles. I'm willing to guess that the black circles that are in Washington will ultimately turn red, because most of the red that you see is from surveys that have been on board for at least 10 years. So, except for the stuff in Washington. And so, over time, you're going to pick off new species. I have a chart that I make every year that I submit to ECAS in my report that shows the number of routes for each species. And that's just using this information visually to show you on a map. The males are usually silver and white, black wingtips. I don't have a picture here that shows the white rump patch. I think I got one on the females here. Very distinguished looking bird. And the mask around the eyes and behind the eye and the face is pretty, almost makes it look like an owl. So, if you see something like that around in the field, pretty good chance it's a harrier. Same thing here. These are the females, the plumage for females. There's lots of browns, lots of streaking on the chest. And again, you can see the mask and the facial disc. The juveniles are a little different. They're pretty solid coppery on their chests. You can see the white rump patch on the right-hand picture there. And that plumage will change when they molt the following year. And so really it's hard to guess the sex of a bird when they're in this plumage. You pretty much have to wait until they get into their adult plumage before you can understand what you're looking at. And a lot of times they hunt by gliding around over the tops of fields. And then when they see something, they drop and pounce, a very quick action. And mostly field mice, that kind of thing. But they do hunt the marshes sometimes. This poor coot found out the hard way. And we have bald eagles. They are one of the top 5. This is a killer picture. I couldn't believe it. When a couple of years ago, I put a PowerPoint presentation together, and it's on the ECAS website for those of you who want to view it. It's a big one. It's got like 200 and close to 240 slides, and if you watch it full bore from front to back, it's like it's like a long range movie, 2 hours and 40 minutes or something like that. Each picture has an audio track, so there's a lot of information in that you can look at. Of course, you can bust it up in segments if you want, but these are some posing pictures of eagles. Some great shots. And they're pretty well spread throughout the project area as well. You know, you're only got 22 routes 2 years ago that didn't have them out of 392. So they have officially returned from their doldrums in the 70s when they were really hit hard with DDT. And this is another density and distribution map for bald eagles during the month of February. So you can see that the concentrations are there. Along the Columbia, they're usually going after smelt runs. The valley area that I do is usually for sheep, scavenging sheep that have died mostly from foot rot. Klamath Basin is a big waterfowl area that they use, and some of these other big concentrations are cattle areas where they have calving going on and subsequently cleaning up the afterbirth, which they also do when the sheep are born. They're pretty well scattered throughout the whole project in good numbers too. Each one of those big circles is at least 50 birds. So when you're seeing 50 birds on a survey, that's pretty cool. This is what happens when you get too close to one, maybe a food source or a nest or something. But that's what a potential prey gets to see too. So that's not something that I'd want to have chasing me down. They have a very diverse diet. During the winter months, they will scavenge anything that they can find. So the upper left, there's a sheep carcass that's indicative that the gal that took that picture I work with, she does goose counts. And so we share data back and forth throughout the winter months. She took that picture and I said, can I use that picture? That's perfect. And that's what you see. I mean, I've seen upwards of 15 or 20 eagles around a freshly dead sheep carcass. And so that's how I can get the big numbers. There's a lot of eagles in the valley. Upper right is a goose kill. Lower left is actual fishing, you know, catching a live fish. And you got birds on the beach that are scavenging dead animals and birds that come in. The upper left is a bird that I suspect actually killed that grebe. But these other pictures are all scavenging food. And they also will scavenge deer. These next 5 slides were taken just behind a residence of one of the people that does surveys for me in the Grangeville area of Idaho. They have the Clearwater River running behind their house, and the Highway 12 runs in front of their house. And every season they'll get deer kills, and they have permission to move them down to the river so that the eagles can feed on them and not worry about getting slaughtered by cars going by if they want to try and feed up on the road. So these are some interaction shots of eagles feeding on a deer carcass that they put down there. There's some incredible photography. Couple Interactions between adults there. Yeah. Lots of action on over carcasses in the wintertime. They have to eat, they got to eat. So there's going to be multiple conflicts going on all the time. One of the other 5 top species is the rough-legged hawk, and this is a really good shot of showing the indicators for that species. Big, broad white tail band from the base of the tail down to almost to the tip, as opposed to the white rump patch off the tail for harriers. Usually having a whitish color head and these 2 dark circle patches in the wrist area of the wings are indicative of rough-legged hawks. They're pretty well spread out through the western side of or the eastern side of the Cascades. And we get a lot more wintering down in the areas around Idaho Falls and down in the Bend area of Central Oregon and the Klamath Basin area. Those are some really key areas that you would see on those maps that I didn't put in here to save time. And all the mapping can be seen on the ECAS website. And I'll put the website up here before the night's over. Interesting thing about rough-legged hawks, they are capable of perching on very, very tiny limbs. So when I see a bird in the distance that's on a really small, scrubby little tree, my first thought is rough-legged hawk, and put the scope on it. Yep, it's a rough-legged hawk, and off you go. Redtails will, for some odd reason, they need something a little bit more substantial to perch on, although they can do it. But you don't find too many rough-legged hawks perching in big trees. They like to be out in the open field where the feeding action is. You can see why they call them rough-legged hawks on the picture on the right. Lots of feathering in the legs area. They have a couple of different color forms. The light morph, which is much more common. Dark morph, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5% of the population is dark form, very, very rare. The first one I saw, the first thing I said was, "What the heck is that?" Then you funnel down in on the specifics and realize what it is. But it's a very striking bird to see in the field. The ones on the left there, the light morph, are that's their common look. They have a unique way of hunting. I mentioned the hover hunting skills of the kestrel. Well, the rough-legged hawk structurally can hover hunt too. I've seen red-tailed hawks, which are more stubbier and short-winged, hover hunt, but they need a little bit of headwind to hover against to get enough lift to hold them in a stationary pattern. These guys do it automatically. And it's an amazing thing to see. These are bigger birds than red-tailed hawks. They're good-sized birds. And when you see this big thing hovering stationary out in a field like that, you think, how in the heck can it stay up? Well, considering where it's raised in the Arctic, where there are no perches available, they've adapted to hunting this way. And so they do that when you're down here too, and that's what you get to see when you see a rough-legged hawk hunting. This is what he's going to look like. He just stays in place in the air until he sees something and drops just like a kestrel. Golden eagles, they are another fairly common species that we have. They are scattered throughout the project, although the majority of them are on the east side of the Cascades. We do get sightings over on the west side in the valley, the Willamette Valley, and they've been pretty well throughout the eastern part of Oregon, as well as the southern portion of the non-mountainous portion of Idaho. You can see why it's called the golden eagle. It's got a tremendous set of golden hackles that are quite visible. The The juveniles are a little bit different. They're a little bit more smoother brown color in the head. They haven't developed those hackles yet. And they also have that broad white tail band. You can't miss that when you see a juvenile eagle, golden eagle. From the bottom side, the eagles, the juveniles will have that white pattern in the window part of the wings, we call it, the base of the secondaries, and of course the white tail band shows. And the golden eagle adults are pretty much all dark. And then we got the ferruginous hawk, which is quite a striking bird. Ferruginous comes from iron, what do you call it? Ferrous, like ferrous oxide, iron oxide. You get that red rusty coloring. The adults will have noticeable ferruginous colored shoulder patches, as well as leggings. You know, you see the long leg feathers there. Very, very concentrated in Eastern Oregon and along the Columbia River. Not too many make it across the Cascades. I've seen a few on some of my surveys, but they're a treat. They're not something to be expected. The first thing you notice is that you're usually perched on the ground. And when they do that, they show that white chest that you see the picture in the upper right-hand corner there. That's bright white. And like this picture on the left here, it's white, as compared with the off-white color of a red-tailed hawk. But that's the first indicator. You see something like that, you better stop and look, because it's something that's going to excite you. You don't get to see them too often on our side. And this will give you a couple ideas of how they can vary in color underneath. A bird like on the right is gorgeous bird, absolutely gorgeous bird. The top side of the bird, you can see they have these distinctive white wing windows in the primaries area, base of the primaries out on the wingtip. And you can see the shoulder patches, the reddish shoulder patches. And they have pretty much a white tail that's streaked variably with rufous color, but basically a white tail, but does have color in it. Red-shouldered hawks, one of the most colorful birds that you can imagine. You see one of these, an adult in the wild, and you're going to go, wow. They are primarily an Oregon bird. We did get one sneak across the Snake River there into Payette, Idaho a couple years ago. The surveys that we had last year in Southwest Oregon yielded a couple, 3 or 4 more birds. So, but by and large, they're primarily a West Side Oregon bird and coastal bird of Oregon. But they are a pioneering bird too. They like to go different places, and so that's why you see all the scattering sightings in Eastern Oregon. And they're a real treat for the people who get to see them, because they're not usually see them once and then they're off someplace else and you don't get to see them again. Klamath Basin is developing its own little population of them, clear down in the south central part of the state. And there's a few nesting pairs that are hanging in tough in the Bend area as well. But those other scattering ones that you see in Eastern Oregon, they're pretty much one-time deals. The dorsal surface of the red-shouldered hawk is what I'm referring to. It's striking, bright black and white markings, just gorgeous bird. Of course, they have the shoulder patch, the red shoulder patch, which gives them their name. And they're very reddish on the bottom for the adults as well. The juveniles are much more motley looking. They don't have the red chest yet. They do have the white crescent at the base of the primary wing tip feathers there. That's indicative of a red shoulder, but a very mottled looking chest rather than the white chest and belly band of a red tail, for example, which could be confused with one of these if you're not paying attention. But yeah, they're They used to be only in the very extreme southwestern portions of Oregon. And in the last 20, 25 years, they've moved north and east and populated at different areas. Swainson's hawks are normally gone by October, but we have had Swainson's hawks documented with photos and by knowledgeable people throughout the course of this program, or the project over the last 17 years. So it's a bird that we don't discount. We'll put the markings down, and you know, the common thought is that there are no Swainson's hawks in the United States during the wintertime, and we're proving it wrong. There's definitely single birds, and you know, they're not big populations of them. Usually single birds that are hung along too long. They're scratching for food. I'd say probably 60% of the ones that we do have are in March when they come back, which is one of the optional months for the surveys. But we mark them down when we see them, and you can see there are not too many of them. 27 out of 392 for this particular year. Routes have recorded them. Yeah, you know, researchers are going to get access to our data through the Peregrine Fund that Gary mentioned earlier in the intro. The last 5 years, we've been able to work very closely with the Peregrine Fund to get them our data. So they have all 17 years now in their database of what we've found in this project. And that's over 13,000 some odd surveys, something like that. Crazy number. Swainson's have 3 different color forms: light, intermediate, and dark. And they're evident in their flight as well. One of the things that people think that, you know, if you record a Swainson's hawk, well, maybe you're recording actually a red-tailed hawk. So I put this picture in here to show you the difference. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the red-tailed hawk has those patagial black bars on the leading edge of the wing. Of course, they have red tails too. But you'll notice that the front half of a Swainson's hawk is white, and the back half of the wings is dark. And that's not the color pattern that you see in a red-tailed hawk. And it's very striking. When you see that pattern of a Swainson's hawk, it can't be anything else. So I throw this in here just to kind of give you a shot at how they can possibly be confused with red tails, but if you know what you're looking at, they're different. And then we got white-tailed kites that have been in the project. They used to be called black-shouldered kites for obvious reasons in this picture. They are pretty much a Western Oregon bird. And when we first started the project, we were seeing them up and down the valley and along the coast. That's why you see all those red dots in the Willamette Valley there. But in the winter of 2009, 2010, we had some pretty harsh weather. And we're thinking it's not proven. No research work is done on that. But since that year, the range of the white-tailed kites has fallen back to just maybe a handful of routes along the coast, and one route that's kind of halfway to the coast. There have been a few sightings on the east side of the Cascades down there in the Klamath Basin, but that's another one of those pioneering situations: here today, gone tomorrow, and never seen again. So just fortunate that we had them when we were doing a survey. They also hover hunt like the picture on the right. And then when they see something, they fold their wings straight up and they kite down to the ground and catch their prey. But this again shows you why they used to be called black-shouldered kites. This picture here shows an adult plumage bird and a juvenile plumage bird. Juveniles have a lot of brown on the dorsal surface and across the chest area. The adults don't. They're pure white and gray color. Peregrine falcons, great birds. They are streamline hunters. They can travel extremely fast, as I'm sure everybody's aware. They are scattered throughout the project area. About, well, let's see, from 76 to 202, we had 26 out of the 60 routes that were added last year recorded them. So that's pretty good. But they are pretty well scattered throughout the whole section of the whole Northwest. It's good to see that many birds again. They too had really hard times back in the 70s when DDT was at its peak, 60s, 70s. This bird on the left had a nest on a hospital, top of a hospital in Bend. So they can be very cosmopolitan. I had a need to see a doctor in Portland one time years ago. And there's been traditional nesting going on under the I-405 bridge that crosses into Washington. And that I got to see, I was sitting in a stoplight and I was the first one in the line. And all of a sudden in front of me, here comes a peregrine, no more than 2 or 3 feet off the ground with a pigeon in its grasp. And it's flying towards the river, probably taking it to its nesting activity to feed the young ones. And I was totally shocked. That bird flew right past 2 people that were walking on the sidewalk, and they jumped. It was so funny to watch. It was great. And here's some pictures of peregrines with prey, mostly avian prey. They'll take some mammals if they can catch them, but mostly birds. The bird on the left that you see with the bands on them is a bird that was banded by an organization that bans peregrines and eagles and occasional gyrfalcons on the beaches of Washington. Prairie falcon is another one of the bigger falcons, although it's a little bit smaller than peregrine. They are lighter in color. They have a different kind of a mask. That's a really very thin, call it a malar stripe below the eye. And it's buffeted on both sides by pure white feathers. So it's a very distinctive mark, as opposed to what you see here for the peregrines, much more bolder, totally capped head in black, big sideburns, we call them. Yeah, they're a different look. And they are widely spread throughout the project. You don't see too many in groups. I think probably if you see 6 or 7 of them on a route, which has been seen down in the Bend, the Central Oregon area on some of those routes, that's a big number. Usually you see 2 or 3, something like that. We get them in the Willamette Valley too, where I am. Kind of nice to see them over there every winter, but not very many. Mostly in eastern Washington and eastern Oregon and lower Idaho bird. Here's a front and back look. Very, very delicate spotted markings on their chest usually. Really bright white feathering. Kind of a sandy color on the back. And you notice that the wingtips come down almost to the tail tip on these birds. And that's kind of important. I'll show you why in a minute. The prairie falcon has distinctive black, what we call armpits. If any of you have ever seen them before, you get an underlook of a prairie falcon flying by. You'll see the black malar stripe there below the eye, and those black markings on the inside of the wings. Definitely a prairie falcon. They like to hunt ground squirrels. So this is a sequence of a guy that took pictures of them grabbing one. It's more of a spring picture because they're going to take them out to the nestlings to feed. But it shows shows the food base that they prefer. Merlins, a little bit smaller, just a little bit bigger than a kestrel, but definitely smaller than prairies and peregrines. They come in 3 different color phases as well. Prairie and Pacific, a very black Pacific bird, and the taiga, which is a multicolored, pretty cool looking bird. Prairie falcons are really light. They're almost like a real small size version of a prairie falcon. And they are quite scattered throughout the project area as well. This is what they look like on the underside and on the backside of the birds. They're very heavily streaked chest, lots of patchworks on their underside wings. They can, and usually, you know, when you see a small falcon flying across the field, if it's going from point A to point B in a very, very uninterrupted manner at quick speeds, that's going to be a merlin. Kestrels will have a little buoyancy in their flight, but merlins are all business when they're flying. They are like a bullet. And then you got the gyrfalcon. He's the beast of the falcon family. Those claws can grasp a flying goose in midair. I've seen it happen. In fact, that's how I saw my very first gyrfalcon. It took off after a flock of cackling Canada geese and just snared one right out of the air. Very strong, powerful bird. But they have extremely large tails, and you don't find too many of them. First of all, they're you know, a high plains kind of bird or a coastal bird. We do, like you see the 3 in the Willamette Valley where I have found them on my surveys. They're primarily after waterfowl and primarily after geese and ducks. In our area, mostly geese, but they will also hunt upland game birds in some of the upper areas. This is one that was captured up on the Waterville Plateau outside of Wenatchee. Amanda caught these pictures, perched and launched. And you can see how big those tails are in that right picture there. The wingtips don't come down nearly to the tip of the tail. And that's pretty distinctive when you see them. These are big birds. They're as big as a red-tailed hawk. For a falcon, that's big. And I was lamenting early before the program to some people that I actually saw one perched on a cross arm of a power pole like this myself, and it had a green tail or a green winged teal underneath it, and I passed it off as a red-tailed hawk when I was driving by it. And I came back 5 minutes later and I saw it again. I go, "Oh, you idiot!" No, they can be missed easily as a red-tailed hawk. So especially areas up around where you guys are, when you're doing your surveys, pay attention to the red tails. Pay attention to the big hawks that you see on the post like that, because you might be looking at a gyrfalcon and not know it. They come in 3 colors, mostly browns or mostly grays like this one, and a few of them are pure white, but you don't see too many of those. It's mostly the grays and the browns. And we get into the accipiters, the Cooper's hawk. The adults will have these the black caps that you see on the top of their heads. They also have massive feet and legs. You can see that in this picture here how big they are. And if you look at the bottom of the tail tips, you see a gradation of the tips of the tail when it's folded. That's a sign of a Cooper's hawk. You know, people have a hard time between Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks. That's to be expected. They're a tough bird to differentiate between, but there are some clues that you can use, and I have a picture coming up here that will show you that. The immatures have a lot of fine streaking. The one on the right looks orange because the color or the sunlight was bad on the photo, but I wanted you to see on these 2 photos, you see the tail tips, how they grade gradually up the tail. That's definitely a Cooper's hawk, and of course these have massive feet too. But I want you to look at the the first look that you see of a juvenile Cooper's hawk is you see white. You see a white chest with streaking on it. When you look at and I'll show you the sharpshin in a minute here. That's pretty, that's the first clue that I look at as I look at the chest and see if I can see the chest of the bird. If my first impression is white, that's the white feathering that's more available to see because the streaking is so narrow. And they are quite spread out throughout the project area. They're very common bird. You don't see more than one or two at a time on a survey, but they are there. For the sharp-shinned hawks, you see the squared off end of the tail on both of these pictures. That's a key. You also notice on the head here that it's more of a grayer color and it gradates down into the back of the head, the nape area, as opposed to Cooper's hawk that have a distinctive black cap. In the field, sometimes you can't see that, depending on how it's perched or the lighting or something like that. So when you're differentiating between Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks, you have to look at several different characteristics to be confident in what you're looking at. Okay, so here's a picture on the left of a immature sharp-fin, and you see what I mean by the first impression being more mottled and brown as opposed to the white. And I'll put these two pictures together in one of the next slides so you can show the comparison. But also look at the bottom of the tail, how the tips are pretty much together as opposed to noticeable gradation up the back at bottom of the tail. And the squared off tail in the flight bird is really indicative. That will be more of a rounded tipped and a little bit longer tail than a sharp shin. They are as well spread out throughout the whole project area. And there's a reason why they call them sharp-shinned hawks. If you look at these two immatures that are feeding on something, you'll notice how skinny those legs are. And the next picture, I believe, is the one that I have the comparison shots. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so you see the difference between the juveniles, the adult on the left, or the Coopers on the left, the sharp-shin on the right. You can see the feet, the massiveness of the feet versus the more skinnier feet of the sharp-shin, more daintier kind of a structure. And the tail tips, you can see real clearly how they move up the tail on the Cooper's hawk versus pretty much the same or squared off on the adults there. So these are some of the key things to look at. Like I said, if I see a white chest on an accipiter perched, I'm thinking Cooper first. Then I go through the process of looking at the other clues to see if I'm right. The other accipiter is the goshawk. This is the adult bird. Tremendous hunters. They are just death on anything they grab. They're so powerful, very powerful birds. We don't have nearly as many of those. They're not as common as the other two, but they're there. And they've been found on these many routes. This will give you a picture of an adult bird, how solid gray their back feathers and wings are, and their distinctive gray head with a white eyebrow. And the chest is white with really fine streaking on it. The juveniles, the other three pictures are juveniles. If you notice the tail barring on the immature Coopers, you notice how they're irregular shaped on the Coopers, and the sharp-shinned hawks are pretty straight across. So if you see a very disjointed barring on the tails like that, you're probably looking at a Cooper's hawk. They have very heavily streaked chests as juveniles, like the one on the right there. And then we got ospreys. We don't have too many ospreys in the project, but they do overwinter. Most of them move out, and they're an early spring bird arrival like the Swainson's hawk. But we have them in the valley, so we get to look at them. Friend of mine took these pictures, and he's he's got some incredible shots of hunting osprey. They are scattered mostly near water. Obviously, that's their main food source. So they're up and down the Willamette Valley, close to the Willamette River and along the coast, and any water system that you can find, they'll be there. They like to hunt, obviously, and they dive straight into water for the food, and that's what they look like when they're going down, straight down, and they pop up and catch a fish like that. This is another successful hunt. You can see the head of the fish in the middle of the picture as it's been grabbed and then carted away. Okay, now we'll get into the owl groups. Great horned owls are the most common owl species in the project. They are all over the place, and you'd think that they may, like any other owl, that they'd be tough to see because they're nocturnal. Well, these guys nest really early. And so starting in January, when the trees are still without their leaves, you can see nest platforms. And if you look at them, if you can see ear tufts, you know it's an owl nest. So that's how most of the owls are counted on these surveys. There will be shots of like this. There's actually two owls in the lower right-hand corner. Can you see the second one? Pretty cryptic, really camouflage well. And here's another picture highlighting the nesting activity. I mean, obviously these trees have leaves on them now, and the three owlets in there, there's three of them, two on the left side of the adult and one on the right. That's later in the spring when things are blossoming out. But like I said, they are primarily counted because they're early nesters. And then the barn owl, they are tougher to find. If you're out on your surveys late in the evening, late in the afternoon, early evening, they may come out early enough to see and hunt, but they're not as easy. You can see a lot of black circles there. There are over 100 routes that have had them marked, though. Some of them are, they can be seen perched on hay bales or in barns, visible from the road. Especially in Idaho, there's a lot of birds in Idaho that use hay bales for nest sites or roosting sites. A couple of different shots of the plumage. The middle one's a night picture. That's why it looks a little bit darker. The left and right pictures are the more common colors of the barn owl. And we got the little burrowing owl. Surprising, we don't have very many of those. They usually go further south for the winter into California and into Mexico. But we do have them. We've got, through this last year, we have 18 routes that have recorded them. And I get them every year in my area. For some odd reason, the birds like to focus in the southern portion of the Willamette Valley. There'll be one or two birds that I'll be able to count most years. They are very diminutive, very small birds. Their wing beats are really quick. They have a tendency to stick very close to their roosting areas. And in the valley, where on my route, this one on the right was using a culvert, a busted up culvert that is used darn near every year by a bird. The one on the left, he was found in a snowbank outside of Grangeville, Idaho, in November. It's an amazing picture. That I know the two primary owl researchers, and I immediately sent this picture to them, and they were just gaga because most of these birds aren't even related to snow. They're gone. Pretty cool. It stuck around for a couple of days and then disappeared. Okay, so a big area for burrowing owl nesting is in the Pendleton area. They have an old Army base there that a guy has been doing research for 20 years, and he developed an artificial nesting unit that he has been able to raise a lot of burrowing owls. And this is, you see the mouth of it, of this artificial burrow, it's a corrugated pipe. Birds from this area are some of the birds that winter in my area in Western Oregon. And we know that because I found a bird with a band early on in the project that I was able to read with my spotting scope. And at the time, I didn't know the banding, the owl researchers, but I got wind of them finally through some digging. And the bird that I saw had been banded in the Tri-Cities area of Washington. So it came down and visited with me during the winter. The one on the right was a really special bird. It was on another one of my routes. And we were able to read all of those bands. The guy that took the picture is another project participant. And he is a very, very good photographer. And so when we were able to run those bands down, that bird was banded as a juvenile bird in Kamloops, British Columbia. And he spent the winter on my route. Amazing, absolutely amazing. The people up there that banded that bird were just ecstatic to find out the information about this bird. And it stayed all winter long. But that was 6 years ago, and we haven't heard anything since or seen him since. So I don't know. Maybe someplace else, or maybe gone. Short-eared owls, another fairly common species in the right habitat. Mostly in the valley in western and eastern Oregon, a few spots in Washington. I'm sure there'll be more that will record them as years go by. Named for the little tufts on the top of their heads, short ears, marsh and brushland areas too, they'll use. Have any of you ever seen a short-eared owl fly? They look like a big moth, very disjointed up and down, kind of a thing, as opposed to other raptors that have a strict cadence in their flight pattern. But these guys, they're like big moths floating around out in the field. I have a roosting site where I've counted as many as 13 coming out for the evening to hunt on one of my surveys. So it's pretty cool. And it's the same habitat that northern harriers use to roost in the night. So it's not uncommon to see harriers coming in and short-eared owls going out, and everybody kind of talking to each other in midair. They get pretty rambunctious with each other as they're mingling around over the roost site. Screech owls, pretty tough to find. They're very fortunate when they are found. They're so cryptic, and if you happen to see one in a hole like this, good on you, because if I'd have seen that, I probably wouldn't be able to know that that was a bird. 18 routes as of last year that have been recorded western screech owls. So they're common in the area, but they're just not out when we're out doing surveys. It's that simple. Again, some pictures. Roosting. Northern pygmy owl is actually easier to find. We have over 50 routes that have recorded them. They're a day hunter. They like to hunt a variety of different things. And so they're visible to the people that are doing the surveys, and that's a good thing. Here's some pictures of one. John Stewart's picture up there on the left was taken on his route, one of his surveys, and outside of Sandpoint. A couple of these other ones were also on routes. You notice the one on the lower left-hand corner, you see those two black spots on the back of their head? I was told a long time ago in one of my wildlife classes at Oregon State is that that's an adaptation to fend off predators coming at them from behind. thinking that they're being watched by those two eyes. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what I was taught. This kind of gives you an idea of the variety of food that they'll eat. They'll grab lizards like the one on the left. They'll grab baby birds right out of a nest like this one did in the center. One on the right caught, looks like a junco. They're very tenacious little hunters for their size. Long-eared owls, not very common. They're tough to find. We've had about a dozen routes that have recorded them in the past. Usually it's because somebody lucks into a winter roost site and finds them, but they are hard. This is a pretty cool shot of a flying one. You can see the long ear right above the top of its head there sticking back. And then the really small northern saw-whet owl. Again, something that's not common to find. 14 routes for this up through last year. A lot of black on that. I would suspect that there's more out there to be found, but they like to roost in, like this picture in the upper right-hand corner. They stick themselves in places where they're very hard to see. This particular one on the right-hand side was perched in an evergreen along a city park in Boise. It was roosting there. A lot of people got to see that one. Barred owls, another interesting story. We all know how they affect spotted owls, but they are becoming more and more prevalent on routes. When we first started, I think I had one, maybe two down in the coastal areas along southwestern Oregon, but their expansion is continuing. And I'm sure we're going to see more routes pick them up in the future. Habitat has to be right, but we have the kind of habitat that they like on a lot of routes. So you know, we're expecting more. They're expanding kind of like the red shoulder hawks did early in the project, like I mentioned. And we got some frontal pictures of them to show you how their streaked chest is versus the spotted chest of a spotted owl. And then the snowy owls. I hope some of you have been able to see snowy owls. Like I mentioned earlier, the Waterville Plateau is a great area to see them. They're almost there every year, I guess. They've been here the first 2 winters that we've done the surveys up there. And they've been seen around Ritzville. And I'm sure you've gotten maybe 1 or 2 up in your area too, maybe west of town, west of Spokane. But these are the spots that we've seen them, the red marks. I put this picture on the left for 2 reasons. One, it looks like it had just finished a meal because it's got kind of blood smears on its cheek there. But look at the feet. Look how well they're protected from the elements. They are just massively feathered feet. And of course, you know, in cold weather, they'll drop their chest feathers down over their feet like the bird in the center there. Any perching one will do that. But this I had never seen a snowy owl's foot like that before, so I put it in there. Some couple shots. The upper right, the ones that Amanda took on the right-hand side are the ones that were up on the Waterville Plateau, out on the ice and flying across fields. This photo selection was taken on the coast of Oregon. One of the birds outside of Astoria, that the photographer, he's the same guy that took the pictures of that owl that came from British Columbia, the burrowing owl. The same photographer. Just a series of birds taking off to show you how they form their wings. Great gray owl, not a common, not a common. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Some of us are really old or really young, and wondered if you could, like.
Yeah, this is just about the last pictures here. I got.
Oh, awesome! Thank you so much. It's very interesting.
I'll whiz through them.
Thanks.
But we've had 8, maybe, or eight different routes have had them so far. Some more pictures of the adults. Hunting flights, looking for something to eat. probably dive into the snow like you've seen pictures before. Northern hawk owl, we've only had one recorded. It was the very first year, right in the center of Oregon. A lot of people saw it. It was in a housing district, if you can believe that, right on the edge of the housing district where before it goes out into BLM land. Hundreds of people saw this bird, stayed for the whole winter. And then the zone-tail hawk that I made allusions to, we did find one. The guys gave a great write-up on a description and looked basically like this bird in Montpelier and Bear Lake area, southeast Idaho, one time. And then crested caracara, usually a southwestern bird, but we've had two on routes. One in the middle of the Willamette Valley, which is the one I saw. The one on the right was found in the Howe area of Idaho on a Christmas bird count. Both of them we didn't get into the database because we didn't have a survey at the time, but they were there. And then last couple, 4 or 5 pictures here, just a chance, during the winter months when we're out there counting birds and you get to see weather conditions similar to a hoarfrost like this, you can get some fantastic pictures. There's a rough-legged hawk on the right, hover hunting. And then migration hits, the birds all leave in the spring. Obviously that's a Photoshop. A friend of mine made that picture for me. But in the spring ends a successful year. Red-tailed hawk flying off into the sunset. And that's it. That's the program. I put this picture here because several people have asked me over time what resources I like to use for identifying birds. These two are tops. These are the ones that I have. And they're great pictures, great write-ups, and both of them are Brian Wheeler's production. But okay, is there any questions that anybody have for those of you who stuck it out? Sorry. Okay, maybe not.
I don't see anything on the chat list, but anyway, wonderful photos, lots of great information, and thank you very much.
Yeah, like I said earlier, if you go to the ECAS website, it's ecaudubon.org. You can view a lot more pictures and get a lot more information, look at a lot more maps of all these species that we've done over the last 5 years. And moving into one thing I did want to mention is that I do have one more route available for anybody that's interested. And that's in the Tyler area. So if somebody lives in that area or wants to go down there, email me and I can set you up with a route. So.
Is that the only route you're adding this year, Jeff?
Well, that's the only one. I had actually put it in last year, but nobody took it. And I've added, let's see, in your area, I'm probably going to be putting a couple new routes up by Coville, north of Coville. That's out of your area, but I've pretty well filled up the available habitat based on that map that you saw earlier of the Spokane area. That pretty well got that filled up. And I'm looking for chances to move further west, like west of Creston is the farthest western route that I have. And maybe southeast going down towards Ritzville in that area. It's not very populated with people down there. And so, there's ample opportunities to put routes in, but people have to go a long ways to get to those areas if you don't have a member or somebody that's living out there. I did put a posting to Tweeters and Inland Northwest Birders. Maybe some of you might have seen that had the list of the routes in Washington that I would like to fill, and I've filled some already. Yeah, that's the only one that I really have available now. I'd like to fill it if somebody wants to do it. That would be great.
Jeff, I'd be interested.
Who's talking?
Joe.
Joe, last name?
Cooney.
Cooney?
Yep, C-O-O-N-E-Y.
C-O-O-N-E-Y. Okay. Can I get your email address?
The letter J, my last name, 805
805
at Gmail.
at Gmail. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for stepping up. I'll send it to you. Is all of that lowercase? J Cooney?
Yeah, yep,
Okay. Cooney.
yep.
Okay, great. Well, there you have it. That was worth it. You're not going to, you can talk to Don maybe sometime, but these things are fun to do. They are fun to get you out looking at things that you probably never would see before. And it focuses your search abilities and your ID efforts in ways that you would normally not have options to do. So it's a really good, and the information is very much welcome in the project. So, okay, I will get you that route. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. It's been wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeff.
And
I also want to mention, Jeff, I've been doing your surveys for 2
I was
years
wondering
now.
if that was you. I didn't see a last name with your picture, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was nice to meet you.
You're ready to go, right?
Yes.
It's only a couple of weeks before those who chose to do November are getting in the saddle. So I'm really looking forward to this year, because getting close to 500 routes involved in this project is an amazing thing for me. If you would have asked me, when I first started this project, when I was just in Oregon, that I would be this much expansion over this amount of time, I would have just laughed in your face. It just was not even in my wheelhouse. But every year, it just seemed like there were more people that were getting more interested in wanting to participate, and I just kept building routes and kept building routes, and here we are, 400.
Congratulations.
Starting off this year. That's pretty darn good. So
Thank you.
well, I enjoyed this, people, and I appreciate those of you who have participated. I appreciate your help, and hopefully you get to see some good birds this winter. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Program.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.